people who are confused, I think so much, one thing I really like to speak to is like, I was so confused on what I was supposed to do. Sometimes when you know you're misaligned, but you don't know what's next, it's a very hard and confusing space to be in. And so what I always tell people is like, if you kind of start to get the vibe that you are misaligned, which, you know, your body will give you signals and your mental health will give you signals, it's really important to do the inner work on yourself, because forget the job, almost put it out of your mind. When you do the work on yourself to really understand, like, who am I at my core and what are the things I love and value, you don't have to go out and look for the thing that you're supposed to be doing. The thing that you're supposed to be doing will come to you.
Welcome back to another episode of the Mile 40 podcast. Thank you all for continuing to tune in, for your feedback, for your reviews. If you haven't dropped a review yet, this is your reminder. Get in there, Apple Podcast, give us 5 stars. It really helps us grow. If you haven't already, please be sure to also hit subscribe on whichever platform you are listening on. Also, be sure to check out the show notes. There's a discount code for picking up your copy of Audacious or Break Barriers. Thank you to everybody who's taken advantage of the discount. And just thank you all sincerely for just continuing down this road. I know I mentioned it on a previous episode, but we are inching closer and closer to episode number 100, which is absolutely mind-blowing at this point when you think about where all this started. Today's guest is a special guest. She was a referral from a former guest on the show, which is one of the things that I really love about the show, is that it's grown its own little community. And, you know, it says a lot. And I'm really grateful for the fact that a guest has a good enough experience to say, hey, you should talk to my friend. And so today's guest is LanaRose Berger. LanaRose is the founder of Conscious Concierge, a wellness concierge station service born from her personal journey through physical, spiritual, and emotional transformation. Lana saw a gap in the market for those seeking holistic healing beyond conventional medicine, a gap she experienced firsthand. Overwhelmed by the myriad of health information and modalities, she discovered the profound impact these practices had on her growth. Her passion for connecting people and guiding them toward transformative experiences became her life's work. Prior to her Conscious Concierge journey, it's a tongue twister, Lana. She spent 10
I know.
years in New York City working in television advertising for networks like MTV, VH1, Nickelodeon, Univision, honing her skills in advertising, sales, networking, and business in the city that never sleeps. It helps her prepare for her time as an entrepreneur in today's world. Lana, thank you for joining me.
Thank you for having me.
I can't be the first person who's tripped up on it.
You are not.
Yeah.
Everyone does. I know. Should have thought about that one before.
No, I love the name. But
Thank you.
I joke around with a lot of guests that I can barely make it through their bios. But you know, I want to call out the fact that even though we led with where you are today, the guests should know there's a big backstory here. And there's more to you than your business. Your business is definitely something we're going to dive into today, and the mission that you're on, which is such an important mission. But I think if you hadn't done the work behind finding yourself, doing your own healing, and navigating your own journey, you wouldn't be where you are today. And so I want to dive into that today. And I want to kick things off by just giving the audience a little bit of background of who you were before the Conscious Concierge started.
Yeah. Thank you for that introduction. Like you said, you know, I worked in television advertising for 10 years. That was my career. And it was amazing. And I had so much fun living and working in New York City. It is why I am who I am today in business. And those memories and those moments are irreplaceable. And yeah, that was what I was doing prior. While I was in New York working in the industry, you know, in my 20s, it was a lot of partying, a lot of like really fun times. And towards the end of my 20s, I really started noticing, you know, my mental health peaking up. And so that was really where I started to do a deep dive into myself. During COVID, there was a catalyst for sure. And that was when I really started. I'm sure we'll get into it, but that was really where I started my journey, my spiritual journey, mental, emotional. I left the country, I went abroad, and I just really went down the path. And I went down the path of different modalities and, plant medicines of all different kinds and working with coaches and guides and healers all over South America, going to retreats, healing my body. Um, and so, after that journey and really going down through all of that, that was where I started. As you said, I saw that there was a hole in the market, and what I had personally in the market, in the space, and what I had experienced really was that there wasn't one person I could go to understand which modality is best for me, right? And in the beginning of my journey, I was just so confused. I was like, well, there's all of these, like, wow, amazing. There's all these different modalities beyond the mainstream. But which one is for me? And it was awfully confusing in the beginning. And so, fast forward 4 years into the journey, I became that person that I was sort of like desperately seeking for education and guidance. And so that was how Conscious Concierge was created. And that is the summary of how I transitioned. But of course, way more to the story.
Yeah, yeah, that's my job. My job is to dig in now and get to get to the good stuff. Just a
Yeah.
few things to clear up for the audience, right? You talk about the different modalities, just to kind of inform them. What kind of modalities are you referring to?
So in the mainstream, I feel like we are typically offered two modalities, I would call them, when somebody is either, distressed or looking to heal or, work through something, and that's therapy and or pharmaceuticals, right? And so those two options, both a big part of my journey, are amazing. But there are so many other modalities, and this is what I'm super passionate about because we're all so different and we're all so unique. And so what works for one person may not work for the other. And so these modalities that I speak of are things like plant medicine, for example, things like ayahuasca, psilocybin, bufo, kamba. I mean, there's so many different medicines that really are an amazing tool that have had a profound impact on my life. And so there's the plant medicine route, which is really getting into the subconscious and the deep, deep, deep belief systems. Then there is meditation and breath work. I sort of put those two in the same category. And then there is the healing of the body. So holistic healing, really understanding what is off in my body, because when we are feeling anxiety or depression, it's usually a few things. It's either a toxin in the body. It's a symptom. Anxiety and depression is a symptom of a much larger issue. And so whether that is a toxin in the body or a trauma that has been unhealed, energy still stuck in the body, or we are in a situation or involved with a person that is causing us, there are all these different ways that we can heal. And so back to the physical body, oftentimes anxiety and depression is just a messenger for something that's physically off in the body. So I worked a lot with and I offer functional medicine and naturopathic medicine to help people really understand if they have any imbalances in the gut and the liver and their hormones, and really take like a deep, deep dive into the body. So that's a huge modality that I work with people on, that I've personally worked with on myself. And I think that pretty much covers the different modality. Retreats, going to different types of retreats, is a huge modality people love, to really get out in the world and go to a retreat of all different kinds.
Where does coaching fit into this, or is coaching
And coaching. And
coaching?
coaching. Mm-hmm.
Okay, got
Yeah. Huge modality.
Got it.
Huge.
Got it. Okay. So now we have a little bit of background for the audience to understand what you're referring to when you refer to these modalities. Now, let's take a step
Yeah.
back. Let's go back to your
Yeah.
earlier life. Where did you grow up?
I grew up in West Allenhurst, New Jersey.
Okay. Um,
Yeah.
Overall, and we'll dig as far as you want us to dig. Anything around
Yeah.
your childhood or upbringing that you want to call out?
Yeah. So I grew up in West Allenhurst, New Jersey, which is a beach town in the middle, of New Jersey in the central region. Growing up, yeah, it was like super beach kid vibes, riding our bike to the beach. I think what's important to call out in my childhood is, my parents got divorced when I was around 6, and it was a pretty tumultuous, pretty intense divorce, and a lot of chaos and a lot of, dysfunction for us to navigate. So at a very young age, my parents put me in therapy. I was 6 years old when I went to therapy. And at the time, you can barely articulate your words. So I was building sand trays, and painting and saying like, today I feel this. And so my parents did a really good job of understanding that we were going to need support for the situation we were in. And like, thank God for that. So from such a young age, I think, that was the beginning of where I encountered some traumas in my life. And so as early as 6, I was on the path of, introspection and really understanding myself and working through my feelings and emotions. And so, that was really where the foundation began for those things. And, that was like the early childhood days.
Did you have any siblings?
I do. I have a brother with my mom and my dad, and then my sister who is with my dad and my stepmom, half sister.
Got it. Got it. How did
Yeah.
how did your parents' divorce impact your own relationships as a child with whether it was your peers, teachers? Did you act out at all, or did you mainly kind of
Mm.
deal with it inside?
My brother was the one that acted out for sure. He was older, so you know how that goes. We all kids are affected differently. I think that I really I was confused. I was 6, so there was a lot of confusion. And I also always operated in like well into my adult life until I really got into this work as like the glue. I really wanted to everybody to get along. I really wanted my dad and my stepmom and my mom and everybody to be like one big happy family. And like we certainly were not, um, given the circumstances. And so I didn't act out, but later on, the divorce and the things that had happened would definitely present themselves in terms of my physical, mental health, and my relationships.
How long did it take until that manifested? Was that what you were talking to and referring to in your later 20s?
Yeah. So, as a kid, because there was a lot of chaos in the home and confusion and fear and things like that, it definitely affected my nervous system. I couldn't sleep at night as a child. I was really afraid of the dark. I was really uncomfortable at nighttime. Yeah, I just really had trouble sleeping. And, my dad, when he went on to moved out of the home and he started a new family and things like that, it was just a longing, like a longing. I remember I had a diary as early as 6 where I would really, really long for this family unit to still remain. And it was a feeling I remember quite vividly, just of really wanting this to work. And so, there was all the things like infidelity um, and it was tough. It was tough to navigate and understand at such a young age. I idolized my dad, and so it was confusing. When I became an adult, I really would say I noticed it in my 20s. I was always putting out fires, I call it. I would have, I was always like charismatic. So I think nobody really thought much of it. But in my 20s, I really started to, I would say, like, always feel like I was stamping out a fire. So I was really, you know, whether it was a job I was looking for, like an apartment or a relationship or like a salary increase, there was always something that was like, I have to do this and then I can relax. I have to be able to accomplish this, and then I can have happiness. And it was very the classic case of like, I'll be happy when, or I'll be calm when. And that started to really, I feel like I was constantly putting out fires. Until my 20s, where I realized like it was anxiety. And in my later 20s, I started, d- I, during my 20s, I was going on such a fast lane. I was living and working in New York City in television advertising. I was absolutely living the fast lane, partying. I was waking up, going to Equinox, working a full day and partying all night. And I did that for like 10 years, and so that was like the dream. I was living the life. And I had, in terms of like credentials and salary, I felt like I had like absolutely made it. It wasn't until the pandemic where things kind of like came crashing down, quote unquote, in my lens at that point in my life. Um, I would say in terms of getting back to the question of divorce, I started noticing, yeah, like my pattern with men and relationships was a little dysfunctional. It was always like sort of longing after people that I couldn't have, and it was really it was really painful. And I had been in therapy since I was a kid, so the awareness was there of the things that had happened with the divorce and what I had seen and the chaos I had been around and the dysfunction. But it wasn't enough. I was still aware, but it wasn't enough to move the needle. When the pandemic happened, I was in a relationship, and that's when everything just totally, really came at a screeching halt.
Got it. We're gonna go there. I have one question that just kind of came to the top of my mind over here around just kind of this overall theme over here. You mentioned your
Yeah,
relationship with your father, and that was
yeah,
a positive relationship. Um, were you ever taught what to expect out of a relationship, like how you should be loved,
mm,
how you should be treated? And it's okay if the answer is no, like, because at the end of the day, your
yeah,
parents were dealing with a lot, and it's possible that that never was able to happen. But I'm trying to figure out where the model was for you,
mm,
if it even existed,
yeah,
as you started to navigate relationships, because you talk about um, chasing down guys that, you couldn't have,
hmm,
right?
hmm,
And maybe you were chasing down the idea of something, and, it was what you painted in your head as being the image of what it should be for you. Uh,
yeah,
but I'm trying to now kinda dig in and figure out
yeah.
where that was deriving from.
Well, it was sort of a double whammy before I answered that question. When my dad had left and that had happened and he went to start a new family and all of that, my mom entered a new relationship and I had a stepdad for almost 8 years. And then that relationship didn't work out as well. And it was also very intense. And, there was things like addiction and infidelity again. And so when he left, that was really painful. And so, during that time, it was like a double whammy of like the men in my life really abandoning us is how it felt. And so to answer the question, I didn't ever really have an example of what it was like. And this has been a lot of my journey and a lot of my work is what it's supposed to look like. Love is supposed to look like. I felt a lot of love. Both my parents really made me feel loved, but the mechanism in which I saw, the family unit and the relationship of my parents was definitely dysfunctional. So it wasn't a really good example. And, bless their heart, we're all on our own journeys and like everything makes sense now. But in that moment, yeah, it was really, there was no real visual of what love and what a marriage is supposed to look and feel like. So when you don't have it in your eyesight, it's hard for you to recreate it, which was really the crux of my issues.
Got it, got it. No, that makes sense. So,
Yeah,
now take us back to, COVID, from a
COVID.
relationship perspective.
So when I was in COVID, when COVID happened, everything came to a screeching halt. Obviously, as we're in New York City, and I was in a relationship with somebody. This was like my first adult relationship. I was single for many many years in my 20s, and so I was 28. And so this was like a big deal, this relationship. And anyway, in COVID, everything came to a halt. Like the events were over, the partying was over, the work grind was over. So it was the first time in my adult life I ever took a pause. Like I would have my schedule booked out 3 months in advance. Like if I wanted to have a dinner with somebody, it was 3 months in advance. That's how busy I was. So you can imagine for many of us, especially New Yorkers, when we took that pause for a moment, everything, I couldn't, I had to deal with my emotions that I had been sort of suppressing with alcohol and partying and things like that. There was no more vices, right? It was just like in the pandemic. So the relationship I was in, um, this person was dealing with addiction, and it had really reared its head, and he had, relapsed. And so I was dealing with some pretty serious subject matter while trying to, put on a front to work and navigate the world and what was going on. I started having really, really intense physical symptoms, really bad panic attacks. Everything got super physical. I was going to the ER. I went to the ER 3 times in the pandemic because I was sure I was having a heart attack and panic attack. And, in the moment, uh, it, it was so physical that I was convinced there was something physically wrong. And now what I understand it to be was basically the beginning of the journey for me to connect to the body, because my body was screaming and signaling me that like it was time to remove myself from the situation and the environment that I was like, quite frankly, in danger. But when you don't listen to the whispers, they turn into screams. And so that's exactly what happened. And this person, we ended up parting ways, and initially he had even broken up with me in the beginning. And that pain of him leaving and the addiction, and it opened up a wound that was very familiar from childhood. And we attract people who create similar nervous, they give us that feeling in the nervous system that we had as a child. And so that confusion, the chaos, the longing, the abandoning, it opened it up so deeply between the stepdad and my dad that I collapsed. Like I could not, it wasn't like a fire drill I was putting out. Like I physically could not continue life the way that I was before. It was so visceral and the pain was so deep. I was like, I wanted so much to understand, like, why am I in this much pain, and why has my physical and mental health plummeted so deeply when I have everything going for me, and life, is on paper is just like this perfect world. But when you're dealing with things like addiction and life or death, and you can't tell anybody, and you're sort of navigating this all by yourself, essentially, it's isolating, it's lonely, and it's really, there's just so many feelings of like, I just don't want to live anymore, and be a part of this if this is life. And that's how I felt in that moment.
Thank you for opening up about that. That's a lot. That's a lot to unpack there.
Yeah.
And I'm hearing a couple of things. I'm hearing addiction, but I'm also hearing that disruption within the nervous system. And that disruption probably outweighs the fact that he was an addict. In right? Or no? Or
Well, look, obviously this is all looking back. What actually it was is like, we attract essentially the same vibrations that we are at. And so initially, it's so easy to point the finger like this person has addiction and they're the problem. But actually we were a perfect match for, our wounds and our level of healing that we had done. And so the nervous system dysregulation, and more so what I was willing to tolerate, was the threshold was so high from what I was used to as a child with the dysfunction and the dynamics, that I was, a perfect match for someone dealing with addiction with my own wounds and my own history. And he was the biggest blessing of my life to really start the journey of deep work within.
so, and I just want to make sure I'm taking it in right. And
Yeah.
I hear everything that you're saying, and I agree with you. Um, it's more so the fact that you got to a point where the chaos was too much, right? It was too, like, you were used to handling a lot of chaos based on
Yeah.
your upbringing, based on everything. You had a high threshold for disruption, like you said. You can handle, some pretty bad things going on in your life and still function high in society,
Yeah.
and still carry on and be, a thriving individual. And so um, this kind of took you to a path of understanding that maybe you don't need to live like this, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. And maybe like the words that I'm saying aren't coming out properly, but I'm trying to get in your head at that point, because I think a lot of us sometimes suppress the fact that over the courses of our lifetime, we've had a different array of chaos thrown our way. And some chaos is a lot more disruptive than other chaos. Some people have seen tragedy. Some people have, dealt
Yeah.
with, broken homes and dealt with,
Yeah.
all sorts of just adverse circumstances. And they've coped with it in different ways. And to your point,
Yeah.
that led them to kind of attract different relationships into their life.
Yeah.
And they almost kind of get used to that level of
Yeah.
chaos always being there.
Yeah, and it was like actually like I was so used to it, so I was taking it all in. I physically like could not function. You know, I was having 3 panic attacks a day and I was still like holding on for dear life to this person and this thing in my life and everything in it, and I was unable to function. And so it was almost like the universe just ripped it away from my hands because I was holding so tight. I was, at that point almost 30 years old. I thought this like was it for me. And so the universe had other plans for me because I couldn't hold on tight enough. It was time to part ways. And it was it was the when I started the journey and really was broken wide open, I was like, I want to understand why I attracted this into my life. That's what I wanted to understand. And that's where the work began. Like, how did I get to this place where I'm tolerating this level of dysfunction? I'm this dysfunctional at this point. And how, with this much awareness of 20 years of therapy, have I not made, how am I had enough awareness to know I'm attracting this into my life for a reason. How am I here? That was all I could think about. And I was just like, oscillating between like I want this life to end, and also at the same time like there has to be another way. There has to be a way out of this.
If you know me, you know that I like to look good and feel good. As an endurance athlete who trains daily, I need my wardrobe to fit the mold. Roan creates performance-driven clothing for your active lifestyle. Each piece is designed for versatility and made with integrity to outfit you for an active life lived on your own terms. The Roan promise is to help you move forever forward. Use code MILE40 for 20% off online and in-store for new customers only. Visit www.rhone.com, that's Rhone spelled RHONE, or find your local store and move forever forward starting today. Well, this is a beautiful inflection point of this recording, of this podcast, because I think that, to be honest, with most guests who would be sharing a story like this, my next question would be, well, what kind of addict was he? What is the impact of using that kind of drug? What are some of the things that you can call out about that kind of drug? But I don't really want to go in that direction because I don't think it's relevant to this story. I think what is relevant to this story is what you just said, coming to that, personal moment of trying to figure out how you got yourself in this position to begin with, and what you need to do, not only to change course per se, but to also understand how to get ahead of this to build the life that you want to live going forward. And ultimately, what that kind of catapulted into was you helping other people also do that.
Long road before that happened, but
Long road. But I mean, that's the beauty of
yeah.
this journey, right? A lot of times it all starts with self-reflection, self-work, right? Like, you got to do the work. And a lot of times you get to the point of doing the work after hitting rock bottom. And
absolutely.
so that's kind of like what this podcast is all about. So, we're going to call that era your mile 40 era. That's where you kind of bottomed out right there. Now walk us through some of the first steps that you took after that.
Yeah. Beautifully said. So I left the country, right? It was COVID. I was able to work remote, and I was like, I just need to remove myself from the environment, right? That was the first thing I needed to do. I was like a totally broken human being. And I was like, I need to to remove myself from everything that I knew life to be. And so I left, I got on a plane, I went to Medellin, Colombia, and I worked remote because there was a group of people working remote called Wi-Fi Tribe, actually. And I joined them. I thought that I was going to just be here for a month, actually. And so when I came out here, I was just, totally wide open. I also should add to the point of the mile 40 is that I was taking, the doctors were pushing pharmaceuticals for me and really telling me like, you have severe mental health going on, you need to take pharmaceuticals. And I did take them for a bit, and they did help me in moments of true panic. And really, I always give credit where credit's due. But I also just felt like there had to be a different way. I felt like super numb, and so that was an important piece of the story because it comes back around later as to why I went so extreme with the different modalities, because I didn't feel traditional. The pharmaceuticals were the path for me. And so all that to say, I got out to Medellin, Colombia, and I was wide open. I was like, I want to understand why the F I am feeling the way I'm feeling. And I want to go deep. And so when I first got here, I started my journey with plant medicine. So I sat with shamans in Peru, in Colombia, in Ecuador, Mexico. I was at this time, I was still, moonlighting in my career, right? So I was by day, obviously a television executive, TV advertising executive. And then I was, at night and the weekends really on this path. And I went really deep. The plant medicine route, so ayahuasca and psilocybin. Ayahuasca was my very first experience with plant medicine, and that broke my brain wide open. I don't know if you've ever done
Tell us,
ayahuasca, but
tell us, and explain to us what it is
honestly,
so the audience knows.
yeah. Ayahuasca is a plant medicine that is from South America. It is really, really profound in the sense that you are really able to get, and this goes for most all plant medicines, really get into the subconscious, right? So we have all these behaviors and patterns and things we attract into our life, and we can like maybe consciously piece it together. But there's so much unconsciously that is running the show, right? When something happens to us when we're young, it's not necessarily about the thing that happens to us. It's the story about what we make it mean. And from there, we live the rest of our life with this story of, which creates our experiences. So plant medicines in general out here, ayahuasca and psilocybin, wachuma, they all really have helped me. They really helped me to go beyond awareness. So, okay, I'm aware that my dad, had the affair and it was super public, and I'm aware of the shame and I'm aware of the addiction in my life. I'm aware that I'm attracting the wrong kind of men, but like it really helps you to go a level deeper. What ayahuasca did for me and what it has continued to do, and why I love offering it as this beautiful tool for people and really bridging the gap between this mainstream world and the plant medicine world, because they're so different, is it's really seeing things from a different perspective, really feeling the emotion behind the experiences so that we can really release ourselves from those things that are keeping us stuck, the stories that we continue to live in. There was an underlying story that I was clearly telling myself when it came to relationships. And so when people go through an experience like that and they really see what's underneath the hood of the car, why don't I love myself? Why am I not attracting the right people? Why I'm not getting the things that I want in life? Why do I feel so much anxiety and depression? Because again, anxiety and depression they're messengers. They're messengers to tell you what's really going on, what you need, what needs to be looked at. So for me, it really brought me back to understanding on a deeper level, and having, a real understanding of why I went through some of the things that I did. And how to release some of that stuck energy that was causing so much anxiety in my body, so much fear in my body. And yeah, really be the observer of your own life. And it really helps you to connect with others and the world and have a much deeper understanding of what's going on here and why we're here.
So, and I don't want to hop around, but I want to make sure I don't miss this point. You mentioned going to Medellin because of the Wi-Fi tribe, right? That's what they were called.
Yeah.
Is
Yeah.
that what drove you to Medellin, or was there any other reason that brought you to Colombia?
So I wanted to go work remote somewhere and get out, but I wanted to be with other people working remote. So I was just Googling where are people working remote. And I found this group of people. It's similar to Remote Year, where they all are in their respective jobs, but you're working together. And like we all lived in this hotel. And so we were all working in our respective jobs. And that's what got me out here. Within a month, I ended up doing my own thing and leaving that experience. But that is what got me out here. And then I ended up, as the pandemic continued, they kept pushing back return to work. So as return to work was pushed, I continued to stay here and not return to New York.
Got it. Got it.
Yeah.
How have you liked Colombia? What's the relationship that you've built with the country?
I mean, I could cry thinking about what this country has given me. Coming here was the first time again, getting out of the environment of New York. And I was like ride or die, New York for life, Manhattan for life. Getting out of the energy of that, the intensity of COVID, the hustle bustle, the obsessive, work culture, partying culture. Out here, just slowed down. I took a breath. I learned to just be in nature. And the people here, they have so little and they're just so happy. They dance and they sing and they celebrate life. And it was just a whole other experience. The relationship I built with this country is like beyond words. It's been a big part of like my healing and optimization journey. And I have met a lot of amazing people out here.
Wow. Wow. I mean, a lot
Yeah.
of people would, a lot of people made moves like that during COVID. But what I love
Hmm.
about it is, Colombia it's a popular destination for different reasons, but I love how you used it for a reason that most people don't even think about. Really, to be honest, they don't associate it with.
100%. Yeah.
And so
There is the
that
dark side here.
yeah, I mean, I don't even know if I want to say dark side. It's more of like it's more of an entertainment side. Uh,
Yeah. Good
so
way. Good reframe.
yeah, and so that's the way that I'd look at it.
Yeah.
Um, so now let's kind of propel this forward. The
Yeah.
Conscious Concierge, right? Tell us,
Yeah.
how long was the
So,
idea in motion, first of all?
well, to recap the modalities, right, all through the years, really working to heal and understand myself deeper and deeper and deeper, getting more granular with all of that. In that work became a lot of, it became clear to me as I started really doing this deep inner work and like finding so much meaning and purpose in my days and a deep understanding of myself. I started feeling like super misaligned with the work that I was doing, right? Advertising served such an amazing purpose when I was there's so many perks, the parties, the events, the dinners. But as I started getting further down the path and I stopped drinking, was a big part of my journey too. And so as I started really spending my days in this work, it was really hard for me. I felt like I started wearing like a mask, even virtually, when I would talk about advertising. And it just became, again, the whisper started coming of like, I think it's your time to leave this environment. And I wasn't ready to really deal with that. And what came up for me during that process was identity, right? My whole identity was being my identity was where I worked, whether it was Viacom or Univision. These were big powerhouse names with a big powerhouse title and salary, corporate card. And so much of how I introduced myself was like, hi, I'm Lana, and I'm an account executive at Univision, or I'm vice president of sales at Marca. Um, so, I would say it was like 2 years before I left the industry did I start to have those whispers of like, I think it's time. Um, I didn't really know where my place was in this world, but I knew that there was a place for me in terms of like this work, right? But I knew I wasn't the coach or the guide or the healer or the shaman or the functional medicine practitioner. And so, because I did a lot of healing with the body. And so basically, I just sort of avoided it, right? Until I just really couldn't avoid it anymore. Univision had asked me to come back after 2.5, almost 3 years here in Colombia. They asked me to return to work. And so this was a big moment where I was like, okay, I have this whole life out here. I've been healing and optimizing my life, and I have a whole life out here, but something wasn't ready for me to let go of the identity of that, even after I had just been so far down the rabbit hole. So I got an apartment back in New York after 3 years, got my business suits out of storage, put them back on, went back to the office. And it was like the first day my team had a happy hour and we went. It was like I was just like time warped right back into,
You're giving me goosebumps
28-year-old
right now.
Lana.
I love this. Lana, I love this so much for so
Oh,
many
so glad.
reasons. You have no idea,
Thank you.
right? Like this topic has come up several times on the podcast, right? The idea of separating your identity from your job, because a lot of people that have come
Oh,
on this show are high performers, right? And so it's a topic that we've seen
yeah.
over and over and over again. And a lot of people are afraid to step up and call it like it is. I talk about, and I don't want to draw too many parallels between your story and my story, but I talk about the first time I went to work after I finally like let my story out of my system. And there was
Yeah.
like this kind of like, you know, big press parade. My story was then all of a sudden on TV, and I realized the impact it could have, and the mission started. And then I got back to work and I was like, I was working in banking at the time. I was like, I can't do this anymore. I was like,
Yeah.
you just can't once you see the impact of it. Where there's
Yeah.
definitely some friction is obviously, can I afford to live? Like, can I afford to live
Yeah.
if I don't enslave myself in the corporate world, while
True.
I pursue these things that are not only making me better, but hopefully making the world around me better, as well. And so I can only just imagine what it must have been like for you at that happy hour. And you called out
Oh my
one
God.
other thing, and that was the fact that you stopped drinking at one point. I've been
Yeah.
pretty vocal, and I think most of the guests on this podcast, most of the audience on this podcast has actually been part of this journey. I
Yeah.
stopped drinking 18 months ago, and it was honestly
Mm.
not driven by anything. Like nothing happened in
Yeah.
my life that was like, I need to stop drinking. I did have a guest on the show who was, a super high performer, who talked about the fact that, he wanted to achieve, in every part of his life, whether it was being a husband, a father, an athlete, so on and so forth. He's like, I just need to remove this because this is not helping in any way. It's just getting in the way. So I was like, you
Yeah.
know what, that kind of makes sense. So I'm just going to stop drinking.
Yeah.
And here we are 18 months later, no
Amazing.
alcohol. Um,
Yeah.
and I've seen the impact, but I level with you on a lot of this because I don't think a lot of people have been able to see the impact and the power that those 2 or 3 years have had on you. So that way, when
Yeah.
you got to that happy hour, it
Yeah.
was a no brainer.
It was a no-brainer. I'll never forget it. Like it was as if the room was like I just remember hearing all the sounds and listening to all the conversations, and it was like about, reality shows, like all the things we used to talk about. Like someone was talking about the Kardashians, someone was talking about like shots, and somebody was talking about like a big client presentation. And I just remember hearing it as if I was in like an amphitheater, and I was like, I can't do this, and I just, in that moment, I knew like my truth. I knew that like I was no longer in that space, and I had outgrown it, and I was trying to fit so hard into my old life. And I had just changed so drastically over these 3 years. I was like in a cocoon out here. I mean, I really disconnected from America, really, like in its entirety, besides when I had to work. So it was at that moment I knew that I was really just in a different space, and it was really hard to come to terms with it. And again, we get back to the identity, right? Like it was the identity that I really struggled with. And yeah, like who am I going to be without this fancy title and this job and this salary and all of these things? And so to fast forward a bit, I pleaded with them back to go remote. And of course, the answer was no. And so I ended up really still not ready to let go of the rope in the sense that I got offered an even higher title with an even higher salary remote. So I was like, this is okay. I
This
still
is
knew
better.
my
Yeah.
time. I knew my time was done, but I was like, I cannot still say no to the money. And it was a vice president of sales title for a big global company. The number one sports news company in the world. It's called Marca. And so it's like a bar stool really for Latin America. So basically I took that. And again, within a few days, like of a first in-person event, I was like, there's no fucking way. There's no way I can sit here and talk about, selling this proposal through to Doritos when I have like really seen the pain of the world, like what people were going through. I had healed so much of my anxiety and depression. It was all I wanted to talk about
Yeah,
was
you realize none of this actually matters.
I was like, none of this matters. And I was like wanting to share so much. Like, listen, they had once told me I was diagnosed with OCD, anxiety, depression. Like, I have healed. It's just a symptom for a much larger problem. Like, I was like foaming at the mouth, wanting to tell people, like, I healed my body from when I was on birth control. Like, there was just so many different things. I wanted to talk about the generational trauma, and it was just not the space for it. And so finally, it all kind of happened at one point where I started dating my best friend of 15 years, who's now my boyfriend. And when we were still friends, we would spend a lot of time together because I started helping him get into this work. I started helping connect him. Same story. He had been to therapy, and then he had been on, they had told him he needed to take pharmaceuticals. So he came to me and he was, asking me to help connect him to these modalities. Like, what did you do out there? So he was the one that started saying to me, every day I'm with you, somebody calls you and they ask you where they should go to what they can do beyond these traditional routes. They ask you about your story. They ask, who are the functional medicine practitioners you worked with to get off birth control? And the questions that would come, I was on the phone daily. What's the difference between coaching and therapy? Do you have good therapist recommendations versus coaches? All of that. And it started really surfacing because I would share. And so he had a massive transformation. He lost 70 pounds when I sent him to do coaching and plant medicine. And so what he had started noticing was, again, this was happening with friends and family because I was connecting them and educating them on these modalities. And he looked at me, he's an accountant. He's like super, brains, all brains. And he said to me, like, you're done with advertising. And let me tell you something, you have a business. And I was like, what are you talking about? And he was like, I lost 70 pounds and I am not taking pharmaceuticals. I'm in the best place. I don't have anxiety and depression anymore because of you. And I was like, you think? And he really broke it down of how he envisioned it. And, at the time they were doing layoffs. And so they laid me off, from my vice president of sales job, which made so much sense. I was like, thank God. And within 2 days, I sat down with my best friend, who's now my boyfriend, and I ironed it all out. I called every single, to backtrack, I was so relieved the moment she was just like, hey, like, I think I was like,
Yeah.
thank you, God.
Give me my severance and we're good.
And that was me really good money. And I didn't even think about it. I was like, I have plenty of money saved, or I had enough money saved, or if I had to come back to Colombia at the time, I had moved back, to the States. So I knew I could come to Colombia. I knew I could live for a little bit. And I was like, you know what? I'm going to be fine. And because I had, he had brought that light bulb moment to me where he was like, no, you are doing work in this space and you have a business. And we sat down. Like I said, I called every single coach, therapist, shaman, retreat center, functional medicine, naturopathic practitioner, doctor in my Rolodex that I had personally worked with. And within 4 days, I had turned all of those around into partnerships, launched Conscious Concierge, started, the ball rolling with Conscious Concierge, came up with the name, and I was like rocking and rolling. And I never looked back.
Love that. I love that. That is such a perfect story. And I what I love about it is a lot of people wonder how these things happen. And a lot of people want to do similar things, but they think the path is just full of obstacles, and it's not easy. I'm not going to sit here and try to say this is something
It's
that's
not.
super easy, but what I am going to say is a lot of times we just get in our own way. A lot of times we create obstacles that don't
Yeah.
necessarily exist. A lot of times we don't want to sit down for 2 days, in this case with your best friend, now your boyfriend, or the
Mm.
person who could potentially help you, or even just with yourself.
Yeah.
And a lot of times we just get in our own way.
Yeah.
And, another thing I want to call out, although that job didn't end up being something that you stuck with, you know, at the end of the day, in this economy, there's a
Mm.
lot of corporate entrepreneurs, right? A lot of people
Mm.
who are taking the corporate salary for what it is.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, your job is just your paycheck. And if you can
Yeah.
compartmentalize that and accept that for what it is, right? Do what you got to do to get your paycheck, but put your heart where it belongs, and that's where your passion is, right? And for people who are afraid to fully, jump off the cliff and go dive straight in, that's another mentality that I suggest. I mean, quite frankly, I've been doing it now for 7 years, right? Like, I wrote the books when I was working full time. I have this
Yeah.
podcast I've been doing while I work full time, but I've been able to kind of draw that boundary, and I know
Yeah.
where my heart is. Um, and so
Yeah.
go ahead.
No, and I mean, for people who are confused, I think so much. One thing I really like to speak to is like, I was so confused on what I was supposed to do. Sometimes when you know you're misaligned, but you don't know what's next, it's a very hard and confusing space to be in. And so what I always tell people is like, if you kind of start to get the vibe that you are misaligned, which, your body will give you signals and your mental health will give you signals, it's really important to do the inner work on yourself, because forget the job, almost put it out of your mind. When you do the work on yourself to really understand, like, who am I at my core and what are the things I love and value, that inner work, it will bring, you don't have to go out and look for the thing that you're supposed to be doing. The thing that you're supposed to be doing will come to you.
It'll
The
come to
more you
you.
go down that path, it will
It'll
come to
come to
you.
you, and you will know. And
Yeah.
once you have it, there's no looking back, right? Like once you have
100%.
it, nothing can get in the way of it. No dollar amount, no
Yeah.
title, because you know that
Nothing.
everything else is going to be temporary, right? And at that point,
Yeah.
no one else can take that from you.
Yeah,
Um,
leaving that money was so hard to pull the trigger, really, because obviously when they laid me off, I could have gotten another job, but it was like the money was nothing. No amount of fulfillment could compare to when that person, my best friend slash my boyfriend, said to me like, these 70 pounds and this ability to be happy is because of you and the work that you're doing. And when he said it like that, and I've now heard it so many times over, there has not been one moment where I thought, wow, I really miss working in advertising, because what I'm doing now and this mission that I'm on now is so much bigger than what I was doing then. And nothing bad about that. It's just like, I feel like when you're aligned in your purpose, at least I'll speak for myself, there is just absolute fulfillment. And it's not to say it's easy, because it's really hard, but it's worth every moment. And I feel like I'm really living and walking in my purpose, what I can
100.
offer the world.
No, you're
Yeah.
100% spot on. There's nothing, there's no better feeling than knowing that you found your purpose, right? Like the whole premise of this show, right? Mile 40 represents putting yourself or finding yourself in adverse situations so that you can uncover that purpose, right? And, you know, for me, it happened, in the conquest of an Ironman, which unloaded a lot more than just my physical, pain points. It unloaded a whole lifetime of adversity that I was kind of holding on to. And for you, it manifested through a relationship, which really kind of, again, served as an inflection point, to now birth, like both of them birthed everything that we've done since, right? The Conscious Concierge came out of it. For me, the books, the podcast, the whole platform came out of it. And that, is in full alignment with what this show is all about. Um, And so thank you for walking us through that. As we kind of approach the end, I want to make sure we give the audience an update. Where has the business gone since it has started? What makes you the most proud of this business? And if there's anything you want to call out in terms of some of the learning moments that you've had along the way, we'd love to hear that as well.
I think what I'm most proud of is the business. As much as it's a business, I feel like it's a mission. And for me, it's really a mission to help people understand that they're not broken. We're living in a sick society, and really help people get the proper guidance that they need. It's really become a mission for me to really get the word out that anxiety, depression, OCD, all of these mental health issues are symptoms. They are symptoms, and they're like sacred messengers for us to listen. And if we learn to listen, if this was a world in which we were listening to the body, this would be an entirely different world. And so it doesn't feel like a business. Sometimes it feels like it's a movement and a mission for us to stop treating symptoms, to stop putting a band-aid on these symptoms. And a lot of the problem with society is that we're not taught that there's time. We're not taught that there's time to do the deep unearthing. And that's really what the business has become for me. It started out as like, okay, let me connect people to get to alleviate their symptoms. And instead it has grown to what I believe is a real movement of like what we're even doing here on earth, and to really find our purpose and listen to the blueprint in our own body. We look outside ourselves for so much guidance, when the only person that has those answers is yourself. You just have to learn to listen. And so I want to live in a world where we teach people to listen to their body, to find their own blueprint. And that is the mission that I'm on. And I feel it has gone, much bigger than I even imagined it would go. And I can't wait to see where it goes from here. I think that we're living in a time of a true awakening. People want to really heal. They really want to optimize their life. And I'm just really grateful to play a hand in the role of alleviating people from suffering and living a life of real purpose and meaning.
I'm so proud of you. I'm so proud of
Thank
you.
you.
I'm so happy you came on, you shared your story, and you connected in such an authentic manner. And I think a lot of people heard things from you that they're thinking, themselves, in, a variety of different ways. And what I love about your story is your relatability. And I think that's
Mm,
one of the most important elements to what you do as well, right? When you think about the people that you're serving and when you think about the mission that you're on, um, you have to level with the people that you're speaking to. Otherwise, you're never going to succeed. Um,
yeah.
and and that's come through in this conversation. I don't want to cut you
Yeah.
off. It sounds like you're going to say something, so go ahead.
Thank you. No, I was just going to say exactly that. It's like concierge is all about meeting people where they're at and giving people options, right? Like I just want to really make it clear that like because we're all so different, like we can't just be given these two options. Like we have to open up the door. And so what I really aim to be is a bridge into these other modalities. And I really believe that there is real healing for everybody, and we're all just so unique and different. And so there are plenty of options for people, and I'm here to provide them.
Awesome. Well, thank you for coming on. Thank you for educating us, for inspiring us, and for leaving us with a lot to reflect on. We're rooting for you, and we're excited to keep
Thank you.
watching your journey.
Thank you so much.
You got it.